So we're seeing this incredible other government that's running the show. And you've talked about, and we've all talked about, how they basically put a death warrant on JFK because he was working with the Russians. And he was working with the Russians to keep America safe and so forth. You know, that's his privilege as the American president. But they didn't like that because they weren't in charge, they weren't in control. So they put out a death sentence on him. Now, I'm going to share a picture with the Scherfs, who is the Bush family. Basically, this is them in Germany. So they're with Otto Skorzeny, who was a very top level special forces guy in Nazi Germany. Reinhard Gehlen, Martin Bormann, Joseph Mengele. We know all about him with the medical stuff. But here's George Scherf Jr., who would be George H.W. Bush. And here's his father, George Scherf, who eventually would be Prescott Bush. So Prescott Bush, as we know him, was born in Germany, served in the German Navy, and his son, George Scherf, was born in Germany as well. So obviously not eligible to be an American president, but he was. Of course, both of them are running the government of this deep state and making decisions and so forth, like we saw. We know that George H.W. Bush was at the scene. He's been. There's pictures of him at the JFK assassination. So, what are your thoughts about that?
All right, so I haven't seen that picture before. That's an amazing picture. I've heard the story before. I know that the Bushes were involved with several other families that had a lot of money invested in the German stock market, and back, in the time frame between World War I and World War II, going up to World War II, there was a lot of money invested. Now, Jim Manning already alluded to the fact that Allen Dulles, as a CIA officer, was involved. He was a lawyer to start off with, and he was at Sullivan and Cromwell. And Sullivan and Cromwell represented a lot of those international interests and investments in Europe and with the Germans and with other countries, even like Guatemala and the copper company in Chile. And when Allende in Chile said, hey, we're going to nationalize the copper company and take it away from America, you're taking too many of our resources out of our country and we're not getting paid anything for it. That's the kind of stuff that generates, coups to overthrow a country, because, you've got all these investors. And when you're in the big dog in the dog lot, and one dog says, hey, I'm taking all the copper, the big dog says, oh, no, you're not. And that's really, in my view, that's really all it is. Those people don't want to leave. And that's why the mafia was so pissed off at Kennedy for the failure of the Bay of Pigs, because they wanted their property back, all those hotels and beachfront property in Havana that they lost when Fidel Castro took the country and then basically announced it was going to be a communist thing and aligned with Russia. So, but the Bushes, he was basically CIA his entire adult career. He was on one of the Jedburgh teams. Late in the war, he parachuted into France. He was with the OSS, and then it became the CIA, and he was with these assassination teams. He used a cover in Texas, and it was called the Zabata. It starts with a Z, oil company, and I think they were taking those the big grants, to have the oil rigs and things like that in the Gulf of Mexico. He had two ships. One was called Barbara, was named after his wife, and the other one might have been called Sabata. I can't remember, but it's something that was significant to him and his family. But we know that from James Files that they were running heroin from Laos into those oil rigs, and then they run them in, because they weren't checked by customs. They went back and forth between like Louisiana and Florida and Mississippi and stuff like that in these surface boats and helicopters. I've got friends that left the Marine Corps when I was a pilot in the Marine Corps and went to work for PHI, Petroleum Helicopters Incorporated. And they flew helicopters back and forth to those rigs several times a day. And there wasn't anybody checking them. So they could have brought a bale of marijuana or, whatever, 50 kilos of cocaine or, whatever. So we know Bush was, the Jeb and George W. were involved in picking up some of those loads. In fact, there's a picture floating around of Jeb Bush at one of the airports picking up, at meeting the airplane that had like Barry Seal's plane full of cocaine. George H.W. Bush was in Dealey Plaza. I think that's one of the pictures that I gave you, but you don't have to flip to that. Just if you want to flip through the pictures real quick, I can quickly describe what they are. I think a lot of them are evidence of the stuff that we're talking about. That's Gary Marlowe. He was called the Raven. He's the guy that shot Officer J.D. Tibbet. Gary was working with the mafia, and Sam Giancana had told him not to let anybody know he was in Dallas that knew him. And he was tasked with killing Lee Harvey Oswald. And he was over there looking for Lee. Lee was supposed to be walking with his pistol from his boarding house to the movie theater. And he bumped into J.D. Tibbet. J.D. was a friend of his from the Bay of Pigs operation. And because he was told that nobody could know he was in Dallas, he killed J.D., which I find bizarre. I mean, since they'd worked on a black op together, it seemed like he could just say, hey, dude, don't tell anybody I was here. You know what I mean? I'm not sure I could kill one of my close friends just to, but I went to college at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. I was just at my 45th reunion this weekend. I spoke with Nancy Mace, the Republican from South Carolina, and I'm talking to her director of operations now about getting to speak or to have us speak at this oversight committee in Congress and getting Jimmy to be able to be interviewed there. But a guy that was a class behind me in 1981 is Greg Vogel. And Greg is a college professor. It's on the internet. He's at the George Bush School of Intelligence at Texas A&M University now. He's retired from the CIA. He went to the Citadel, was in the Marine Corps. I won't tell you the whole story, but he went to the CIA. I think you worked with Greg in Afghanistan. He was chief of station there twice.
Chief of station in Afghanistan, yeah. Great guy.
Yeah, Greg, he is a great American. He won the, I think it's called the Distinguished Intelligence Star. It's equal to the Medal of Honor. He's the guy that saved Hamid Karzai's life in an accidental bombing. But Hamid Karzai, and this is the kind of decision the guy has to make. Greg didn't make this decision, but somebody came up with the idea that Hamid Karzai was going to be the president of Afghanistan after we overthrew the country. And that's what we did. And they put Hamid Karzai, they named the airport Hamid Karzai International Airport. Okay? But Hamid Karzai is not what his biography says he is. When he was hired, basically recruited by the CIA to be the president of Afghanistan, he was a hot dog vendor on the mall in Washington, D.C. But the biggest reason that he was recruited by the CIA, it's absolutely true. Eric Prince verified that from Blackwater, okay? But when Hamid Karzai got recruited to be the president of Afghanistan, the biggest reason was, several reasons. He could speak English well, he was pro-American, all that kind of stuff. But his brother, which might actually be a half-brother, Waleed, is the biggest opium dealer in Afghanistan. And shortly before the United States pulled out of Afghanistan, the facility he was in was bombed and he was killed. Imagine that. But Hamid Karzai's brother, and I don't know if you know the story, but Karzai bugged out of Afghanistan right before it fell with millions of dollars in a private jet. So who knows? He's probably owns one of those big houses on the Intercoastal Waterway in Miami, I imagine, down there next to Zelensky's house. But he was a hot dog vendor. His brother was the biggest opium dealer in Afghanistan, and the Taliban had about run off all the opium poppy growers, before we went in there. But when we went back to Afghanistan, they were producing something like 3 to 5% of the world's opium. But by the time we left, they were producing like 97% of the world's opium. Now, what does that tell you? Going back to Robert Trumbull Crowley, if he hadn't released this document and then Gregory Douglas hadn't written this book, Regicide, I don't know if Jim Manning would have ever known about that kind of stuff. But God moved him to write this book, Patriotism Unhinged, I think. And I'll tell you, I think it ought to be the biggest bestseller in New York Times, history, because it is the smoking gun that proves that the government killed John F. Kennedy.
Well, there were other people involved too, like the oil barons, like Jim
Yeah.
talks about in chapter 8.
There's there was a lot of reasons that they killed Kennedy. They wanted the Vietnam War. He wanted to get rid of the Federal Reserve. I mean, he just pissed off too many people.
Wanting to team up with the Russians on space exploration. They had. I don't have a perfect answer on this, but I understand from some readings that they had started to decrease the number of nuclear they had at that time. They were going to get down to where they had a certain number, but it wasn't going to be as high as it is now. And so there was a lot of people. Israel, they were fighting like hell to get the nuclear bomb, and he wouldn't give it to them. And then it was another spy, our head spy, James Jesus Angleton, was spying for the Israelis and gave them what they needed to do it. So, they would turn around and kill him. But anyway, there's a list. I could probably make up like 12 different groups that were very happy that he was killed.
That's right. And one of the ironic things, and Michael knows this, but I like to mention it when we get on this subject. After Kennedy was killed, they buried him at sea, And I've recently heard somebody said that because he was a Navy man, Robert F. Kennedy requested this. But nobody has ever made that public, and I think it was spite because he had mercury in his head, and if they left his body in the grave. But his body's not in his grave in Arlington National Cemetery. It's out in the ocean. But, like you were talking about, there's a lot of people that wanted him dead. But I think it was a cruel joke. He was buried in a white concrete box that had holes in it. And if you go on Main Street, about a block from Dealey Plaza, there's a big JFK memorial there. And it's a white concrete box with these circles on it. Now, who in the world would think to memorialize John F. Kennedy's life by a white open box? That is, there it is right there. And all it is like 4 walls with gaps in it so you can walk into it. And all that is an inside joke to the people that know that they buried him in a concrete box off of, where is
Nantucket?
Yeah, Nantucket, yeah. Out there and it's probably not too far from where John Jr. was, because he was buried off a U.S. naval vessel, and Ted was there at the ceremony.